This is my current desk, and there's something on here a little bit new. You see, I've been using the little Mac Mini Pro as my day-to-day workstation since I picked one up just before Christmas. But I do still love jumping onto my big powerhouse PC, whether that's for some heavy lifting in DaVinci Resolve or the occasional spot of gaming. I keep a mouse for Mac and a mouse for Windows on my desk at all times. But the downside of these traditional big powerful PCs is they are a little bit massive. But a company called Beelink have come up with a pretty neat solution to get chunky PC performance with a much smaller footprint. Oh, mind your eyes, by the way, we're turning the lights on and we're going full screen. This is the Beelink GTI 13 Ultra, which yes, Beelink did send over to me to make this video, but this isn't a paid or sponsored video, and I have been using this to replace the big chunky desktop. And on its own, as it is, like all the other mini Windows PCs, it's not particularly great at video editing. But it has a secret weapon, and it all comes down to this little slot right here. This is PCIe. That's the same PCIe Express where you'd usually plug in your GPU into your motherboard. And yes, my old PC is really dusty. And this is the Beelink EX docking station. By now, you can probably see where this is going. This allows you to plug in a full-size, full-fat desktop GPU like my NVIDIA RTX 4080 here, into this little fella to get chunky proper PC performance out of a little tiny PC. Benchmarking that GPU in both my new and old systems in Cinebench 2024 returns practically the same result. Setup is easy as well. Simply slide the PC in and then click your graphics card into place. There are braces and screws to secure everything down. Then it's just a case of connecting all of your power cables and HDMI. It comes with two 8-pin power cables in the box, but because my 4080 is particularly hungry, so I just had to buy an adapter off Amazon. Once that's all connected, you're pretty much good to go. Now I know, when it's built up like this, it's not exactly small. It's a fair chunk bigger than the tiny little Mac Mini, but it's still a lot smaller than the big PC. But without the dock, it's small, light, and portable as you'd expect. And it actually does a surprisingly decent job at handling all of your standard day-to-day tasks. And that's because on the inside, we've got an Intel Core i9-13900HK. That's 14 cores, 20 threads with a max turbo frequency of 5.4 GHz, and does have an integrated GPU. That's the Intel Iris Xe graphics with QuickSync. That QuickSync is worth mentioning. We'll come back to that in a moment when we're actually in DaVinci Resolve. Now that is a mobile CPU designed generally for laptops. It runs at 65 watts. It was considered a decent CPU at the time and was found in some high-spec gaming and creator laptops. Now there were some known issues with the 13th gen Intel CPUs, but having a look online, I think most of those issues seem to have been ironed out. In Cinebench 2024, we get a single core score of 117 and a multi-core score of 956, which is lower in both single core and multi-core than the Apple base M4, and it gets kind of spanked by the M4 Pro. Comparing my older but was a decent CPU at the time desktop AMD 5950X, the i9 is faster in single core but a fair bit slower in multi-core. We've got 32 gigabytes of DDR5 5200 MHz RAM and a 1 terabyte PCIe 4.0 M2 SSD, both of which are upgradable. Thumbs up from me. It's not the easiest job in the world. You have to take the back off, you've got to remove the power supply, you've got to unplug these speakers. There's a little bit of work to get some things out the way to drill down to the SSDs and the RAM, but it's not too tricky. I managed it without breaking anything, so I'm sure you will be able to as well. Now there are other variants available directly from Beelink with more memory and more storage as well. Next up, ports. It's got some. Most noticeably, around the front, there's a full-size SD card reader, which is always a bonus, a standard Type-C port, so that's up to 10 gigabits per second, and the power button doubles up as a fingerprint reader. Around the back, we've got the one singular Thunderbolt 4 port, that's up to 40 gigabits per second, two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports, and overall we have 5 in total Gen A 3.2 Type A ports. There's also two 3.5mm audio jacks. Then we've got the dock itself. This has a 600 watt internal power supply, which should be plenty enough for even the beefiest of graphics cards. Then you've got the PCIe Gen 4 X8 slot on here. Now this should offer enough bandwidth for anything up to an NVIDIA RTX 4080. But if you're using some of the 50 line, which actually use, I think, Gen 5 X16, I believe it is, then you may see a little bit of a drop off in performance. There's space inside for an upgraded Wi-Fi module, and there's some little thingy-majigs to add some antennas. There's also space for an M2 SSD, which I actually installed because I thought that's a good idea. When it's docked, you've got some additional storage, but it's quite slow. So I wouldn't really recommend using that. It's fine for some cold storage, archive, that sort of thing, but I wouldn't use it for any of your active media. You're much better off putting your SSD directly in the little PC itself because you get much faster speeds. Now, as mentioned, the dock, it's a little bit big. It's probably the same size as like a mini ITX case, so the footprint isn't as small as it could be. Would it be nice if it was smaller? It would, to be honest. There's also lots of empty space if you open it up. You do feel they could have made this a fair bit smaller. And overall, I think the setup looks pretty cool, especially with a cool looking GPU like this 4080 spinning away. But I do wish the docking station wasn't this cheap looking primer grey. It feels kind of cheap as well. It would have been better if they at least matched the finish of the little PC itself, because that doesn't look too bad at all. Right, next up, let's talk price, because this thing is actually quite reasonable. You can get the mini PC on its own for $599. That's with the 32 gig RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. The docking station on its own is $179, but you can get them as a bundle for $718. Now, obviously, you will also need to buy a GPU, so it's not really like for like. I'm using this very expensive GPU, the RTX 4080, which admittedly doesn't make a huge amount of sense. I also picked this up. This is a $250 GPU. It's the Intel B580. It's new as well. It was only released the end of last year. I thought I'd pick this up. We could do some comparisons and see the type of performance you get with a much more budget-friendly GPU. But it's garbage at the minute. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's a driver issue or just some compatibility issues with DaVinci Resolve. I've also tried this same GPU in the old PC and I'm getting the exact same issue. So it's not limited to this setup in any way. Purely this thing being stupid. But I'm going to keep it and keep trying it because this thing it has potential to not be too bad, especially for the price point. But at the minute, I'd stay away from it. It's not very good. Now, all the talk is obviously around GPUs, but this is a standard PCIe slot, so it doesn't have to be a GPU. You could throw in a capture card, like my Elgato one here, or even something like a Blackmagic Decklink card. Next up, noise, because it's not as loud as you probably think. The GPU, for example, during everyday usage, just sits there silently without the fans spinning at all. It only really kicks in when under heavy load, and even then, it's still much quieter than you might expect. The same can be said for the little PC itself, which again remains silent during your day-to-day normal usage, and when you start to push it, the fans will kick in, but it's still not overly loud. It's definitely been set up to thermal throttle to cut its power rather than having the fans sitting there at full blast, which does mean you're leaving some performance on the table. However, in this sort of setup, I don't mind that all too much. Purely out of curiosity, I cranked the fans to max and even added an additional fan, and running the same Cinebench benchmarks as before, we only got a very marginal improvement, so it's not really worth it anyway. So, I think that's all the necessary stuff out of the way. Let's boot up DaVinci Resolve and have a play and see how it all runs. Now, the very first thing we're going to test is simply opening up DaVinci Resolve and see how long this takes. Now, we are currently running without the graphics card, so this is relying on the integrated GPU. And there you go, that didn't take very long at all. Now, while we're still running on this integrated GPU, let's just restore this project. Which again, that was pretty snappy, and we'll open this up. And this is a 4K project. There's a couple of 4K timelines. Let's just make sure we're on the main one, which we know is 4K. If we open this up, timeline settings, 4K, 25 frames. And if we go to playback, timeline, playback resolution, we are on full. Now what we're going to do, jump over to the cut page and then simply load all of the files from all of these different folders into one big timeline using our source tape, which actually happened really quite quickly. There's still some coming in. And now we can scrub through all of these clips. And actually, the preview's taken a while to update. There you go. Now it's caught up with itself. And it's not doing too bad of a job. It's not as smooth as the entry-level Mac Mini, for example, on the base model M4. But for an integrated GPU, this is not bad. Remembering all of these clips are a variety of 4K, 6K from Osmo Pockets, as well as my Lumix S5. And it's not doing a bad job. If we select all of these, put them on a timeline, let's just jump over to the edit page. We can whip through here. And again, not too bad. We can start to delete some clips, do some ripple deletes. And it's all kind of acting as you would expect. Now that's all thanks to the built-in QuickSync, which is Intel's own kind of media engine. It does all the encoding and decoding of the video formats, and it's actually quite good. Remember, this is purely on the integrated GPU. So even on 4K, using 4K footage, you'll be able to chop things up quite nicely. You can just lay down the timeline, cut things up, and if that's all you need, that's not bad. But the problem with it is, as soon as you start to do even just a little bit more, it really starts to slow down. Now, this is a much bigger project. If you have a look, this is kind of my typical YouTube videos, and we've got some color grading on the main footage, and we've got a bunch of titles and this, that, and the other. Now, you can still skim through the footage relatively quickly, but if we hit play, we have hit play, and the UI's just having a moment. And now it's really, there you go. And now it's playing. And it's really starting to struggle. We kind of do a bit of a zoom in. That worked okay. And it's just taking a second. It just starts to struggle here. As mentioned, we do have a grade on this, which is why we're dropping a bunch of frames. Knocking the timeline playback resolution down to half does improve things. More than I was expecting, to be honest, for this little integrated GPU, but it's still not a particularly smooth experience. It will get choppy, the UI will slow down, and it's not an ideal editing system for this sort of work. And it's here where it really starts to struggle. So kind of like for like, mini PC versus Mac with no additional graphics, it's not there, really, unfortunately. You can do a little bit, you can cut things up, but you try and do much more than that, and it starts to stumble. So let's reboot now with that GPU. So we're back in now, we're making use of that 4080. So let's jump into this 19.1 video, and straight away we're going to see that this is a lot smoother. We can jump around this timeline, we can hit play at pretty much any point, and we're not going to have the same issues we were having just running on that integrated GPU. So this will run really quite nicely, even when there's a load of effects going on. This has got MagicMasks, so it's dropping a couple of frames, but it's overall not too bad. All of the animations and titles and generators all run really quite well. Real time, 4K, without too many issues whatsoever. Now, we actually ran this timeline off. This is a 22-minute timeline, and we did it on basically all the different combinations. So on my 4080 PC, it did 11 minutes and 55 seconds. On the mini PC itself, without the GPU, that took 44 minutes and 59 seconds. And the mini PC with the 4080, which is actually the fastest out of the three, that did it in just 9 minutes and 36. I think because there was lots of Fusion titles, the Fusion in DaVinci Resolve likes higher clock speed single core performance, which this Intel has over the multi-core performance of the 5950X in my other PC. Now, this is another really simple timeline. There's not really much going on this one. All of this footage, again, everything is 4K. This is 4K 422. I believe this was 10-bit. 4K timeline. I didn't have to do any color grading for this one because it was actually done in camera. because I baked it in on my Lumix, but we are using some of these audio effects which you get within DaVinci Resolve Studio, which can kind of make things chug a little bit. But overall, this is still playing back really nicely, kind of as you'd expect with that 4080. The big PC, 1 minute 43 seconds. The mini PC with the 4080, slightly slower at 2 minutes and 7 seconds. I don't necessarily know why, but it was a little bit different there. And then the mini PC on its own, still quite quick actually, did it in 4 minutes and 59 seconds. The entry-level Mac Mini, 2 minutes and 11, and the M4 Pro, 2 minutes and 6. Now we've got another 4K timeline here. There's actually 2 timelines within this project. The same clips, we've just got 4 clips on the timeline, but this first one has got some heavy motion blur applied, which is a heavy GPU effect. On the 4080, as you'd expect, it smashes through that without dropping any frames, no issues. This one's got loads of halation on there, and again, plays back, no issues. This one, we've got noise reduction, again, all good. And this one has the film look creator. There's another timeline, there's exact same clips, but without any of the GPU enabled effects actually enabled. So this is a really good test to run kind of your baseline, just chopping things up and rendering them out, versus when you start to apply some really heavy GPU effects. So the results, when we did the timeline without any GPU effects whatsoever, it was all very close across the board, to be honest. And then with that GPU heavy effects timeline, the big PC, 2 minutes 43, the mini PC with 4080, that came in at 3 minutes 32, so just a smidge slower. The M4 Mac Mini, the Pro version, 7 minutes and 51. The entry-level M4 Mini with the M4, 16 minutes and 40. And then last place, as you'd expect, the mini PC with no GPU, 30 minutes and 39 seconds. So this is kind of shows why people, especially me, were so impressed with this M4 Mini. It's punching above its weight without having a proper dedicated GPU. And when you compare it to the mini PC without its GPU, you can see that the M4, especially the M4 Pro, is doing quite a good job even with these heavy GPU effects. But when you start to add a big beefy GPU into the mix on the little PC, obviously that starts to get way quicker. Now, to test some really heavy fusion stuff as well, we ran the spaceship render, which you can download for yourself. I've linked it down below. This is really CPU based with just a teeny bit of GPU as well. So again, it's a good little test for these. The big PC with its 5950X did it in 28 minutes and 34 seconds. The mini PC with the GPU was 37 minutes and 52. And even without the GPU, it was 41 minutes and 15. That's kind of expected. As mentioned, that's more CPU based than it is GPU based. So the GPU made a small difference, but not much. While the M4 Pro was actually the quickest overall, because that CPU is really quite impressive, 27 minutes and 28 seconds. Next up, we've got one of my chunky YouTube timelines, and this one's interesting because there's bits where we've got a few layers, different effects, different titles and that sort of thing, and the main A-roll footage, let's jump over to the color page, has a decent grade on it with the film look creator, which is also applying some halation and that sort of thing as well. So this is actually quite a hefty little timeline. Slight delay here and there, but overall, this is playing back really nicely, kind of as you'd expect, again, on the 4080. We'll drop in some frames with this little thing, and that's obviously quite heavy for whatever reason. Yeah, and now we're back playing in real time. Now we ran this one out twice, once with halation and then once without, again, just to see how much of an impact one of these GPU heavy effects has. With no halation, the big PC, 7 minutes and 41. The mini PC with the 4080, 5 minutes and 33. And the mini PC with no GPU, 36 minutes and 27. Again, the little PC was actually better than the big PC, I think because this one has so many Fusion-y titles which prefer the single core, so it ran just a little bit quicker. With halation enabled, the big PC, 8 minutes 48, the little PC with GPU, 6 minutes and 3 seconds, and the mini PC on its own, 45 minutes and 54 seconds. Last but not least, we've got this Team2Films DaVinci Resolve benchmark, which you can download for yourself. There's 3 main timelines within here, a GPU one, a CPU one, and a mixed. Now this contains all sorts of different footage, all sorts of 8K red footage, all this sorts of stuff, with loads of different heavy GPU enabled effects applied. We've got things like super scaling, MagicMasks, relights, all this sort of stuff. And I'm not going to read all the results out because there's too many, but we ran the GPU timeline, the CPU timeline, and the mixed timeline on all of the different devices, and you can see the results on screen now. They're kind of as you'd expect with the mini PC with no GPU coming in last place across the board. The M4 Mini being a fair bit quicker actually, usually about twice as fast, but still the slowest of the rest. Then we've got the M4 Pro, then we've got the mini PC with the 4080, and then the big PC generally being the quickest. Now, just to give you an example of how some of the GPU enabled effects do run in real time on the timeline, we've got some clips here. Let's jump over to the color page. Let's just do some magic masking on this lady here. We'll leave it on faster. We'll enable our overlay, which happened straight away. And if we hit track, the 4080 is really good at AI-based stuff because there's loads of tensor cores. It's really high for this sort of thing. So you can get some really quick tracking when it comes to using the MagicMasks. The same can be said when doing any sort of noise reduction. It's very heavy GPU focused. So this footage obviously will get real-time playback. We can add 5 frames of temporal noise reduction on faster. Let's just give this a little bit of this. Hit play, and we can still get full real-time playback. It's only when we go to better, actually even at better, we're still getting full real time. So that's kind of the most amount of temporal noise reduction you're going to apply. And then if we go to spatial noise reduction, start to add a little bit of that as well. It's only then when we start to drop frames, although it's still doing okay. Let's go better. Now we're dropping frames. And if we start to add the Ultra NR, which is particularly heavy, then we do start to slow things down a bit. But you have to push the noise reduction quite far to start to see anything dropping off. Superscale and the film look all run really well, as you'd expect. So the last one we'll show you is the speed warp, which is notoriously heavy. Let's drop this down to 20%. We'll come to retime. Let's change this to optical flow, and we'll go speed warp better. And we can hit play, and we are dropping some frames, but this is still really quick for speed warp better. If we were to change this to speed warp faster, I'd imagine we would get real-time playback. And if we go speed warp better, but let's just drop our playback resolution down to half, I'd imagine we would get real-time playback. So again, the 4080 kind of coming into its own when doing any of this sort of stuff. So with that out of the way, we did a little bit of gaming. We're not going to spend too much time on this, but let's show you some of the results from that. I ran a couple of benchmarks in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, all at 4K. We ran it at the highest settings with no ray tracing, and the results were basically identical. We then did the same with some ray tracing, and again, basically identical. And then we also enabled DLSS, and once again, pretty much the same. We ran a couple more in Cyberpunk, and it was only when we dropped to the medium settings that for some reason the big PC started to step ahead. I'm guessing with the lower settings, it was at that point where the CPU became the limitation rather than the GPU, so the more powerful 5950X started to step ahead. If you're after some kind of lower resolution, super high frame rate gaming, then the 13900 HK may start to be a limitation rather than obviously the GPU. But for most casual gamers and whatever else, it's pretty good. It's pretty solid. I have no issues with it because it runs basically the same as my old one did. So I'm happy with that. So to conclude, I think this is a really cool little setup. I'm going to mostly jump to this setup rather than the big PC. I will still keep the big PC and I'll set it up for something else. But I like this setup. It sits nicely on my desk. I think it looks pretty cool. I do want to try and get that Arc 580 working, and it's much easier to swap these GPUs out than having to crack open the box and do all the other stuff with a traditional PC. Does it necessarily make more sense than a traditional PC? Probably not for everyone. It really depends on your use case. If you like the idea of being able to take the PC out away from the graphics card and take it with you for portability reasons, then it makes a whole lot of sense. If you want to be able to swap out a GPU for a capture card regularly, again, it starts to make a whole lot of sense. It may be that you have a work desk where you only need the little PC, and then you've got a gaming setup somewhere else, and you can just take the same PC, plug it into the GPU at your gaming desk, and you've got one PC which kind of does the function of two things rather than having to buy two individual PCs. Not to mention the power and the energy benefits, which could save you some money. Rather than running the GPU all the time, you can simply boot up the PC without the dock turned on, which will then use considerably less power while still being powerful enough for all of your daily tasks. I'm not necessarily saying you should go out and buy this, but I do think it's a pretty neat solution. And for those people where it makes sense, I think it really does start to make a lot of sense. It's one of those things which, if Apple came out with it, it would probably look a lot neater and, it would look a bit fancier. It'd also be a hell of a lot more expensive. But if Apple came up with this sort of solution, people would go mad for it. I do think it is a very, very clever solution. Now all someone needs to do is build the exact same functionality into a laptop, because I think this functionality in a laptop makes the most sense. If you could have a really thin, portable little laptop you can take with you wherever, crack on, do your work, do what you need to do, but when you come home you can dock it into a docking station like this and get the full power of a proper desktop GPU in an instant, and off you go. I think that would be really cool, so hopefully someone does that next. So I think that pretty much covers everything. Onwards, take it easy. I'll see you next time.